There are all sorts of different sneakerheads and sneaker collectors out there. Some people just love the vintage OG stuff. Others love their Air Jordans. But whether it's Dunks, Air Forces, Air Maxes, skateboarding shoes, if there's a cool style of Nikes out there, you better believe there's a niche group of collectors that focuses just on those. But for me, when I was curating the ShoeZeum, I knew that I needed to have everything. Shoes that appealed to every single type of sneakerhead in the whole world. Some of my favorite exhibits to put together included a pair of vintage original Nikes, like this pair of Stings from 1976, and I loved putting them on display alongside a pair of the retro re-releases, like this pair of 2006 Junya Watanabe Nike Stings. So these shoes were on display in the 1970s exhibit at the ShoeZeum, alongside this book. The book has a picture of the Nike Sting on the cover. It's called Blue Ribbons, named after the original name of Nike. Nike used to be called Blue Ribbon Sports. And this is the best book when it comes to vintage Nikes from the 1970s. The book was actually written by a Japanese sneaker collector. It's written in Japanese, translated into broken English, and the pictures and content are amazing. So the shoes in the book are on display, and the Nike executives fly down on their private jet to take a tour of the ShoeZeum. And I'm walking Mark Parker through the 70s exhibit. And we stop at these shoes and look at the book. And Mark looks at me and he sort of nods and he says, "You know, Jordy, we actually bought this guy's collection." Sort of insinuating that Nike wanted to buy the ShoeZeum. And this began the negotiations between Nike and myself for them to purchase the ShoeZeum. Ultimately, they made me an offer for 500 pairs of shoes, which I turned down because I decided to sell the shoes on eBay myself. When I look at these Stings and I look at this book, I can't help but remember that experience with Mark Parker. Now I'm going to move all this stuff out of the way, and I want to spend the rest of the time on this video looking at early vintage Nikes from the 1970s, and I want to match them up with the retro re-releases that came out years later. Now there's a lot of people that just focus on the vintage OG Nikes, and they sort of turn their nose up at the retro re-releases because they're not exactly the same as the old ones. For me, I think it's so cool that Nike makes these shoes over and over because we actually have a chance to wear them. Let's have a look at this pair of LDVs. LDV stands for Long Distance Vector, and this shoe is actually my very first Nike memory. So they came out in 1978, and they're incredible. They're yellow and blue, UCLA colored. They feature waffle soles. Remember that the waffle sole was Nike's first big innovation. And they also have this uppercase Nike font on the tongue, which was a change from the original Nike logo, which had a cursive Nike. And the change was because a lot of people were confused and they used to read the old logo as Mike, but now these big, bold capital letters, you knew that they were Nikes. So I want to take you back to 1979 and my very first Nike memory with these LDVs. It was my second birthday party, and my mom planned this party where all my friends were coming over and Mickey Mouse was going to show up to entertain us. And the morning of my birthday party, my dad had a race to run. My dad used to run marathons in Nike shoes when I was a kid. So anyway, my dad leaves the house early in the morning to run his race. My mom and I get ready for the party. My friends show up. They come over. Mickey Mouse arrives. And my dad's still nowhere to be found. And I'm looking at Mickey, and I can't believe he's in the house. And I look down at his feet, and Mickey was wearing my dad's LDV waffles. Of course, it was actually my dad dressed up as Mickey, but I had no idea at the time. And I pulled my mom aside, and I pointed at Mickey's shoes, and I said, "Daddy's shoes." And that was my first ever Nike memory. And I sort of remember thinking to myself, everyone wears Nike shoes, even Mickey Mouse. Let me move these vintage OG pair out of the way, and I want to get into some retros. And let's have a look at this pair. You've got the black and red box. It's going to say LDV LE on there, and LE stands for limited edition. These shoes were released in 1999. You can tell right away when you look at this release compared to the earlier release. The newer one is much bigger and bulkier, has a lot more padding. The shape of the shoe is a little bit different. You know, it's not perfect, but it's pretty darn close, and at least we can wear a pair of LDVs without worrying about them falling apart. So these ones came out in '99. I want to actually break out another pair of LDVs that Nike retroed. and these are LDV vintage retros. They're made to look vintage, and Nike did a great job with these shoes. So in 2007 and 2008, Nike released a lot of their original waffle runners in these crazy wild colors, and the shoes are all made to look vintage. So when you look at the midsole down here, it's yellow. When you look at the outsole, it looks weathered and worn. Even the shoelaces themselves are a tad bit yellow, and they're just made to look and feel a lot like the actual vintage ones that came out in 1978. And I think these are just super duper cool because it's really a chance for us to get our hands on a pair that's pretty close to the originals and actually wear them and not worry about them falling apart. I bought this shoe at a Nike clearance store for $34.99. I remember running into it and immediately thinking of my second birthday party. So I want to move these LDVs out of the way, and I want to keep going and take you to another pair of vintage OG Nikes from the 70s. Boom. Without any further ado, the Nike Disco. So for me, the ShoeZeum was all about going back in time through shoes. Remember, Nike started in 1972, and so I had the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s curated through shoes. And when you walked through the ShoeZeum, it was so much more than just shoes. It really brought you back to the time and the era, the music, the culture, what was going on at the time. So, you know, in the 70s, there had to be a disco exhibit. These are original disco shoes. There are a lot of different names for these shoes. Some people call them the Studio 54. Others call them the Tailwind. Others call them the Night Track. They're really called the Discos, though. When you look at the box, the OG box, you can see right down here, Nike was calling it the Disco. So we'll call it the Disco for all intensive purposes. It came out originally in 1978, and the upper was modeled after the LDV shoes. And it also looks a lot like the Tailwind, which was the first Nike shoe to have air. So you'll notice right away that the upper on this shoe is metallic silver. It's got these really cool bright red glittery accents, a glittery red swoosh. The outsole has glitter on it as well. And there's no tread on the outsole of this shoe because it was made for moonwalking. And so you know, of course, Michael Jackson had a pair. There's a picture of Michael Jackson wearing these amazing shoes. And there's also a picture of David Hasselhoff wearing these amazing shoes way back in the day. So these discos were on display in the ShoeZeum next to a revolving disco ball and a Saturday Night Fever record, really to bring you back to the 1970s. Now I want to have a look at a pair of retros of this same shoe, and Nike actually calls this the Tailwind Night Track NRG. So there we have it being called the Tailwind, also the Night Track. I wish Nike would be consistent. I don't know why they don't just call it the Disco when clearly that's what it was when it originally came out. But without any further ado, let's have a look at them. Also, the NRG in the title stands for energy, and it first showed up on the Galaxy Foamposites. Typically, if there's a pair of Nikes that says NRG on the tag, it means they're dope for whatever reason. Anyway, let's have a look at the retro re-releases of the Disco. They're going to be bigger and bulkier than the original release of the Disco. Still got that cool glitter in the laces, the glittery swoosh, the glitter in the outsole. There's no tread on the sole, so you can moonwalk in them still to this day. These shoes are amazing, and they were also retroed in blue. So if you could imagine where it's red, navy blue. But that edition was very limited and was only released at a shop in France known as Colette. I've never been able to come across a pair in my size. Remember, the entire ShoeZeum is size 11 through 12. So it's not like I can compromise the collection by picking up a pair of these in a size 6, which is much more readily available than a size 11 or 12. Anyway, I want to take you to one more original pair of shoes from back in the 70s, and like that Colette edition, I haven't been able to come up with the retros. So let me move the retro Tailwind, Night Track, Disco, whatever you want to call it, out of the way, and make room for this pair of shoes, which came out in 1979, and of all the pairs of original vintage shoes in my collection, it's in the best shape of them all. I mean, I still marvel at the condition of this shoe. It's never even been laced up. So these are Daybreaks. They were made in the USA Actually, all of these vintage shoes were made in the USA, with the exception of the original Sting that we started the video off on, and that was made in Japan. The Daybreak was named after the sunrise in Phoenix, and the colorway was also patterned after the sunrise, and it makes sense with this bright orange swoosh and the sort of sandy colored upper. Really, really amazing, good-looking shoe. Sort of a waffle sole, but not nearly as protruding as the waffle sole on the LDV that came out a year or so earlier. I absolutely love this pair of shoes. I haven't been able to find the retros for them. But believe me, it's going to be a whole lot easier to find a retro of this shoe than it would be to find a pair of 1979 Daybreaks in absolutely perfect condition. And so the beauty of all of this stuff was I was able to curate the history of the 70s, but also get a lot of the pairs that are actually very wearable and I can wear myself. So now that I'm selling off the collection, I can pick and choose between which ones I can keep and hang on to, which ones I can wear, and who knows, Nike will probably keep doing this where they retro the classics in new editions that we can all buy and rock.